Welcome to another deep dive here on the show.
Always fun to dive into some new material.
And today, we're looking at Buddhism,
Oh, cool.
but not really as a religion.
Okay.
We're going to kind of look at the more practical wisdom that it offers
Interesting.
and see what we can apply to everyday life.
I like it.
Yeah, so we're going through this text called Lessons from Buddhism to Awaken Your Mind.
Okay.
And we're going to be focusing on how these teachings can help us deal with, I guess, just like everyday frustrations. You know,
Right.
like why happiness never seems to last.
Yeah.
And like that constant feeling of wanting more.
Definitely familiar with all of that.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of our listeners are probably in that same boat too.
For sure.
And the text kind of jumps right into one of Buddhism's core concepts,
Okay.
dukkha.
Dukkha.
Yeah, and we often hear this translated as suffering,
Right.
but it's actually a bit more nuanced than that.
It is, yeah.
So how would you explain that?
Dukkha, like you said, it's often translated as suffering. But it's really more about dissatisfaction.
Okay.
It's like a spectrum, It can
Right.
be anything from like minor annoyances to like really deep sorrow.
Like what kind of annoyances?
Oh, the
Yeah.
little things like
Yeah.
spilling your coffee on your new shirt
Yeah.
or like missing a deadline at work.
Yeah.
Or even just like,
Yeah.
when you have that feeling like something's just off.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you have like
Yeah.
the bigger things like grief and heartbreak and,
Right.
anxieties about life.
Okay, so it's not always like major painful events.
Not necessarily.
It can also be like these little everyday things
Exactly.
that just like bug us.
Yeah, it's like a feeling of this isn't quite right.
Oh,
That can kind of permeate everything,
interesting.
both the big and the small stuff.
Yeah. And I think the text even points out
Mm-hmm.
that like even those peak moments in life,
Okay.
the things that we would consider pure happiness,
Yeah.
they can even contain an element of dukkha.
It's true. How so?
Well, think about a time you felt pure joy,
Mm-hmm.
like when you were holding your newborn baby for the first time.
Okay.
Or when you landed that dream job.
Yeah.
Or like finally achieved a goal you'd been working towards for a long time.
Yeah, those are amazing moments.
They are.
Maybe.
But even in those moments,
Yeah.
there's that little seed of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
that it won't last forever.
Right.
And that awareness is part of dukkha too.
Wow. I never thought of it that way. It's
Yeah.
like even when we're at our happiest,
Mm-hmm.
there's this kind of bittersweet undercurrent of
Yeah.
knowing that it can't last forever.
Exactly. And that brings us to the first noble truth.
Okay.
The truth of dukkha.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not meant to be depressing. It's more like a wake-up call.
Gotcha.
Just acknowledging that impermanence
Right.
is just woven into life itself.
So it's not about like trying to avoid difficult emotions.
Or pretend that like everything's always good.
Nope.
It's more about accepting that life has both joy and sorrow,
Yes.
and both are temporary.
Exactly.
It's about seeing things clearly without the sugarcoating.
I like that. Yeah.
And this makes me think about how we're always chasing happiness,
Mm,
always striving for that next high.
right.
But like you said, everything is impermanent.
It is.
Like, have you ever noticed
Yeah.
how even when you achieve something you really, really wanted,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of excitement,
Yeah.
it kind of fades pretty quickly,
It does. And that's a perfect example of how the second noble truth comes into play.
which is Tom.
Or
Yeah.
craving.
Okay.
It's that deep thirst for things to be other than they are. We crave the pleasant experiences
Right.
and we desperately try to avoid the unpleasant ones.
Makes sense.
But it's that constant wanting,
Yeah.
that feeling of not enoughness
Mm-hmm.
that keeps us on that treadmill,
Always chasing something.
Always chasing, yeah.
So how do we escape that cycle?
Well, that's what the third noble truth is all about.
Okay, so what is that?
Nirvana,
Nirvana.
which is often misunderstood.
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of like a loaded term.
It is.
What does it actually mean?
It's not about floating on a cloud and playing a harp when you die.
Yeah.
It's an inner state of liberation
Okay.
that comes when we let go of that constant struggle
Mm.
between craving and aversion.
So it's about finding peace within ourselves,
Exactly.
regardless of like what's happening externally.
You got it.
Okay, I like that.
It's about recognizing that happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances,
Yeah.
but rather on our inner state of being.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we actually get there?
Well, that's where the fourth noble truth comes in.
Okay.
The path to liberation,
Mm-hmm.
often called the Eightfold Path.
So is this like a set of commandments that we have to follow?
Think of it more like a toolbox.
Okay.
Filled with practical skills.
I like that.
For navigating life's ups and downs.
Yeah.
And like any toolbox, you don't have to use every tool for every situation.
Right.
You pick and choose the ones that are most helpful.
Okay. So what are some of the tools in this toolbox?
Well, there are 8 of them.
8?
But we'll get into those more next time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. So last time we were talking about the Eightfold Path.
Right, those 8 tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, exactly. And we didn't quite get to unpack them all.
No, we didn't.
So,
where should we start?
well, let's start with right view.
Right view.
Which is all about understanding those first 3 noble truths we talked about, you know?
Okay, so like dukkhatana, nirvana.
Yeah, exactly. Recognizing that suffering exists, seeing how craving fuels that suffering, and realizing that liberation is possible.
So before we even start trying to fix anything,
Yeah.
we need to understand like the nature of the problem.
Exactly. It's like if you were trying to fix a leaky faucet, but you didn't even know where the pipes are.
Right. You just see the water.
Right. You just see the problem, but you don't know what's causing it. So right view gives us that understanding.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what comes after right view?
Well, next we have right intention.
Right intention.
And this is about aligning our actions with that understanding
Okay.
that we get from right view.
So instead of just reacting to whatever life throws at us,
Yeah.
we're encouraged to kind of take a moment and choose actions that are more aligned with our values.
Exactly. It's about bringing awareness to our motivations.
Okay.
And making conscious choices.
So like,
Yeah.
how do we do that?
Well, it can apply to even the most mundane situations.
Like what?
Think about how you react when someone cuts you off in traffic.
Okay.
Do you get angry and honk your horn?
Yeah.
Or do you take a breath and let it go?
I mean, I try to let it go.
It's not always easy, right?
No, it's not.
But that's the practice.
So right, intention is about learning to kind of like choose our response.
Exactly. And the more we practice that,
Yeah.
the more spacious and responsive we become.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, instead of just reactive and impulsive,
Right, right.
we have that choice.
Okay, so we've got right view, right intention. What else?
Well, the source actually groups the next 3 together.
Okay.
Right speech, right action, and right livelihood.
Why are they grouped together?
Because they're all about how we engage with the world around us.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, right speech encourages us to be mindful of our words.
Okay.
You know, speaking truthfully and kindly, avoiding gossip and harsh language.
Gotcha.
Right action guides us to act ethically,
Okay.
to treat others with respect and fairness.
Yeah.
And then right livelihood is about choosing a profession
Oh,
that's aligned with our values.
that's a big one.
It is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just about what's going on in our own heads. It's
Right.
also about how our actions impact the world around us.
Well, even if your job isn't like saving the world, can you still like bring more integrity and kindness to how you do it?
Yeah, that's right. Livelihood in action.
I'm starting to see how Buddhism
Yeah,
is more than just like meditation and chanting.
it is.
It's actually like a really practical philosophy
Yeah,
for living a more like ethical and meaningful life.
exactly. And speaking of meditation,
Yeah.
that brings us to, right, mindfulness.
Yes, mindfulness.
It's everywhere these days.
It is. It's like a buzzword.
It is, but it's not some new age fad.
Right.
Mindfulness has been a core Buddhist practice for like thousands of years.
Wow.
And there's a reason it stood the test of time.
Okay, so what is it really about?
It's about cultivating this deep awareness of our present moment experience.
Okay.
Our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, without judging them.
So it's not about like emptying your mind
No.
or like stopping your thoughts.
It's more about observing them without getting caught up in them.
So you're not trying to like get rid of the thoughts.
Yeah.
You're just kind of like watching them go by.
Exactly. And you know what?
Right.
You don't need to sit on a cushion for hours to practice mindfulness.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, you can bring this awareness to everyday activities.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, like if you're washing the dishes,
Yeah.
you can pay attention to the feeling of the warm water on your hands, the scent of the soap, the sound of the water running.
Yeah, okay.
Or you can practice mindful walking.
Okay.
Pay attention to the sensations of your feet on the ground,
Right.
the movement of your body.
It's like really being in your body.
Exactly. The key is to bring that gentle, curious attention to whatever you're doing.
So we've covered right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and right mindfulness.
We're on a roll.
Are those all of them?
We're missing 2.
2 more.
But those can get a little more technical.
Okay.
And for today, we're focusing on the ones that are really applicable
Okay.
to everyday life.
So with all this talk of mindfulness
Yeah.
and ethical conduct, it's easy to start thinking like, okay, Buddhism sounds great.
Right.
But like, how do I actually start incorporating all of this
Yeah.
into my crazy busy life?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And that's what we'll talk about next.
So
Because here's the thing. You don't have to become a monk
Right.
or live in a monastery to benefit from these teachings.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, you can start right where you are
Right.
with small, simple steps. So how do we actually take all this wisdom and like put it into practice?
Yeah, like in our everyday lives.
Right, because sometimes it feels like, my to-do list is the opposite of mindful living. It's definitely a practice. And like any skill, it takes time and patience.
Of course.
But the good news is
Yeah.
you don't have to like overhaul your entire life to start,
Right.
experiencing the benefits.
So what are some like baby steps
Yeah.
we can take to bring a little bit more mindfulness into our days?
Well, the source material had this really interesting idea about like next time you hit a snag, instead of immediately going to like this sucks mode,
Right.
what if you tried thinking, okay, this is dukkha.
Yuka.
This is part of life. It's temporary. It'll pass.
Right.
Now, how can I best handle this situation?
So it's almost like taking a step back
Yeah,
and just kind of observing the situation
exactly.
instead of getting swept away by the emotion.
Yeah, you're not denying the difficulty,
Right.
but you're also not letting it control you.
It's a shift in perspective.
It is, and it can be really powerful.
And what about that, Tanha, that constant craving?
Oh, yeah.
How do we deal with that?
Well, the source had another great tip for this.
Okay.
It said, like, let's say you're scrolling through social media and you start feeling that,
Yeah.
comparison or envy.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Instead of just mindlessly scrolling,
Right.
pause for a second and ask yourself, is this actually making me happier?
Interesting.
Or is it just feeding that feeling of like never enough?
Oh, like that.
That little bit of awareness
Yeah.
can really help break that cycle.
So instead of just being on autopilot,
Yeah,
we can start to make more conscious choices.
absolutely.
And this applies to our relationships too, doesn't it?
It does. The source talked a lot about how like applying right speech and right intention
Yeah.
can totally change how we interact with people.
Because, I mean, so much conflict comes from,
Yeah,
misunderstandings,
right.
harsh words, lack of empathy.
Exactly.
Sometimes I wish I had a rewind button for some of the things I've said
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
in the heat of the moment.
But instead of beating ourselves up about it,
Yeah.
we can use those experiences as opportunities to practice right speech.
Okay.
So next time you're in a tense situation,
Yeah.
just try to pause before you speak.
Easier said than done.
It is, but give it a try and ask yourself, what would it sound like to speak from a place of kindness and understanding even if I disagree?
So it's not about being a pushover.
No, not at all.
It's about choosing your words carefully.
It is.
Yeah.
And with the intention of like creating connection rather than conflict.
And I think that's what we all want.
Yeah.
Like those deeper, more meaningful connections with people.
Absolutely. But it's easy to get caught up in our own heads,
Yeah, our own needs and wants.
Right. And that's where
That's right.
intention is so helpful.
So like, how do we apply that?
It's about approaching others with a genuine desire to understand,
Okay.
to really connect on a deeper level.
So even if you don't agree with someone,
Yeah.
can you still like listen with an open heart
Exactly.
and try to see things from their point of view?
That's where real understanding begins.
Before we did this deep dive,
Yeah.
I kind of had this image of Buddhism as being very like
Uh-huh.
detached from the world,
Okay.
maybe even a little bit gloomy. But what I'm seeing now is that it's actually
Yeah.
like a very engaged and practical path
It is.
that really emphasizes compassion and connection.
That's a common misconception.
Is it?
Yeah. But what we've seen today is that Buddhism is incredibly relevant to our modern lives.
Like, you don't have to be a monk to benefit from this.
You don't at all.
It's about waking up to the reality of our experience,
Exactly.
both the good and the bad.
Yeah, the joys, the sorrows, the frustrations, and learning to navigate them all skillfully with awareness and compassion.
And speaking of waking up,
Yeah.
the source called Buddha's message radical
Radical.
in our achievement-obsessed culture.
Interesting.
But I wonder if it's really radical,
Yeah.
or if it's just what we've forgotten,
Right.
what we secretly long for beneath all the striving?
That's a good question.
Like, is it really that radical to say that happiness comes from inner peace and compassion?
I mean, our society tells us that it comes from achievements.
Right, exactly.
So maybe it's not radical.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just countercultural.
Yeah, it goes against the grain of what we're told to value.
And that's why it's so refreshing. It offers us an alternative.
An alternative path.
Yeah, one that leads to more meaning and fulfillment.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired, what's the first step?
You don't need to go on a silent retreat or anything.
Okay.
You can start with a simple act of mindfulness.
Like what?
Take a few minutes today.
Okay.
To just be present.
Mm-hmm.
Notice the sensations of your breath.
Okay.
The sounds around you, the thoughts and feelings that come and go.
Just notice them.
Just notice them.
Don't judge them.
Don't judge. Just be curious.
It's like hitting the pause button on autopilot. Just being present with what is.
Exactly. And from that place of presence, we can start to make those more conscious choices.
About how we want to live.
Exactly how we want to engage with the world.
What we value.
Yeah, it's not about becoming some perfect enlightened being.
No.
It's about taking small steps, making small shifts.
And over time, those lead to big changes.
They do, to a more peaceful, joyful, and meaningful life.
I love that.
And anyone can do it.
This deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
We've only scratched the surface of Buddhism.
Yeah, just a little taste.
But hopefully we've sparked some curiosity.
And some inspiration.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
From the source material.
Right.
The Buddha's teachings are an invitation.
An invitation.
Not a command.
I like that.
It's up to each of us to decide whether we accept that invitation.
To embark on that journey.
Beautiful. So to our listeners,
we
invite you to explore these teachings to see what resonates with you.
What feels true for you.
The path to a more awakened life is open to all of us.
It is.
And even a small step in that direction can make a world of difference.